Excellent news, Patriots. Donald Trump is going to war with Europe. Brother wars are back on the menu, but this time it is simply to make them accept peace. We love to see it. We told you we were going to see it. We told you we were going to drag these people kicking and screaming into peace and prosperity. We are going to stop the world from killing itself, and that's exactly what's happening. For those unfamiliar, Trump and his administration have been reorienting American foreign policy with regard to Europe, Russia, the current war between Russia and Ukraine, and this is very important because simply, we grew up in an era, or maybe we've been living in an era for so long, where when you hear foreign policy, you tend to hear that as this like binary choice between whether you support the sand wars or you do not, when of course that's been nothing but a big fat mistake. It's been a distraction from things like the emergence of China, which really should have been our focus thus far into the 21st century, which quickly is also why Trump's very unique attempts to normalize relations with Russia are so important, because that we have forced Russia into the arms of Beijing is not only an error, it's like a completely unforced error. Russian culture, Russian history, it's obviously far more compatible with Europe and with America than with China. And Russia came out of the Cold War believing us when we told them, yeah, we can get along, et cetera, et cetera. And European and American leadership have done exactly the opposite. And so this is all very good. These are good developments. You know, Trump wants control of the Arctic. He wants to take our canal back. Like, this is an administration which has its game face on and wants to secure the promise of the great American century. Nothing ever happens, not in Trump's America. Things can happen in Trump's America. We've completely recreated the post-war international order, and I hate saying it's gay to even say that, but like, as a nothing ever happens, bro, I'm feeling a little bit iffy, but in a much more real sense, as a patriot, I feel great. And we've been discussing this for years. The post-war international order, whatever, was established in the ruins of the Second World War, at the end of the European Civil War by guys like John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. Though by that point, the libtard riverbeds had already been pretty thoroughly dug and prepared, and more contemporary leaders in Europe and America have kept this running without any serious opposition, like clockwork. It should have ended at the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, but many vested interests have prevented that from happening. For instance, who oversaw the government while the USSR collapsed? Bush, of course. And at some point, we will have to do a separate discussion on the Cold War, because much of American leadership during the Cold War was sort of only pretending to be ideologically opposed to the Soviet Union, sort of to justify the conflict and posture as a counterweight. But once it collapsed, they no longer had to do this. They were free to go mask off, so to speak, in how they wanted things to be, which is why it seems like the American left just became crazy out of nowhere at some point in the 1990s. Yes, because it now had license to. It no longer had to define itself in opposition to something in the eyes of the American public, which was scared of Soviet communism. It could sort of set its own course and then count on the Republican Party, of course, the fake opposition party, to do nothing about it at all. But this is finally ending. America's exiting this foreign policy that we've maintained for quite some time, and it's a really good thing. It's a really good thing for the international patriot. And again, I do not support the brother wars. You will never hear me making the politically correct tribal jokes, the PC racist jokes about the French or the English or the Italians. I have approximately nothing but respect for those cultures and for those histories, but it does happen to be the case that largely their leadership, as is largely the case with our leadership, hates them and wants to destroy their countries. So insofar as we can throw our weight around as the global hegemon, the American empire under the control of President Trump and his administration, I think that will ultimately, by extension, be good for Europe and for the European people. Now, there are three major happenings that I think really display this shift, a new horizon for the American people, and we will go through those now. Firstly, Double XP Vance just recently fired a shot across the bow of the transatlantic post-war union. Then we had Marco Rubio's interview with Catherine Herridge, where he pretty flatly lays out what's changing in America's foreign policy. Then finally, the meeting in the Oval Office where President Donald Trump and Vice President Vance absolutely eviscerated Zelensky in front of the world, and he just sort of had to accept it. The kids are asking me to call it a two-man. Who knows what that means, but it sounds good to me. Okay, yes, we will now play the clips, and you will watch these, and then we will talk about them and explain what they mean for the world and why they should matter to you personally. Okay, ready, go.
But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
You can actually measure the effectiveness of this speech by looking at the faces of the men who run Europe's armies. Like, this is the Munich Security Conference. They say they're the world's leading forum for debating international security policy, whatever. Sounds very gay, but they're like scolding. They're like these raisined school marms just in the audience, you know, when they hear some minor pushback from the American vice president. It's like, sorry, dude, we're the kingpin, okay? It just happens to be the case. And I'm refreshed to see an American vice president abandon this like implicit egalitarian global community, globalism of pretending that we don't get to throw our weight around, especially if it's literally like within the best interest of our people to do so. And in all likelihood, even the people who reside in these countries anyway. And generally what happens at these conferences is an American diplomat will go, if they're representing a Republican administration, they'll, you know, scold the attendees for not paying their fair share. If they're a Democrat, they'll just be more polite, maybe virtue signal about international cooperation, democracy. Nobody really cares. Everybody moves on. Business as usual. Vance, on the other hand, did neither of those things. And as a result, the chairman of the Munich Security Conference literally cried and had to walk off stage when addressing Vance's speech. Now, this is politics. I am enjoying. Are you enjoying?
Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
They give this guy a standing ovation and a hug. Security conference, by the way, these are the people meant to protect us. They're like literally crying on stage. It's over for these people. They cannot handle criticism. They are women. They are eunuchs. And in the last clip, the chairman of the conference was asking whether our common values are common between us anymore. And the answer is no. Obviously, our values, the values of the American people, increasingly the values of the European people, they are not in line with bureaucrats in Washington, Brussels, Berlin, Paris, London, wherever. And XP Vance's declaration of separate values does not exist in a vacuum either. It's important. The total speech was something like 20 minutes. We're going to do a whole breakdown, I think, on the website for members only, hackoffcomedy.com. But in short, he played all the hits. I mean, we had immigration, crime, democracy, Ukraine, economic woes, degradation of Western freedom in Europe. He's highlighting what's going on in Romania right now, where there's actually a U.S. AIDS, NATO, EU-backed coup against election results for the first time in the history of post-war Europe. An election has been nullified once a right-wing Eurosceptic party won the first round of voting. Romania, being the border state of Ukraine, is vitally important to the West's interests in Europe, obviously. In Germany, they're arresting right-wing thought criminals all the time. They're facing terror attacks from Islamist radicals all the time. Their election was just held on the 23rd. AfD, which is another Eurosceptic party, which they say has links to the freaking Nazis. They more than double their vote share. Of course, though, the center-right party would rather start a government with the left-wing party, which is an entirely different problem, though quite natural. The establishment right is always going to prefer to work with the sovereign left, which grants it permission to exist as this fake opposition party, rather than try working with the real right, because the real real right would just replace it because they don't actually do anything or care about being effective. They're just, they're theater kids, right? Happens everywhere, not just in America. A tale as old as time, if you will. So you can take a lot from this speech. These were just the highlights. Some people are contrasting it with Kennedy's speech in Germany, where he famously spoke in German saying, "I'm a Berliner." Yes, arch libtard. Okay, we hate you. This is the opposite of that. This is a repudiation of that. We are stamping this. We are stamping Vance going to Germany and saying, we're done with globalist neo-libtardism. I'm not a global citizen. I'm an American. You're a German. You're a Dane, Russian, Hungarian, whatever. I'm not a Berliner, whatever that is. And can you blame America for doing this, by the way? In 2014, this was like the whole thing Trump was talking about, we were supposed to spend 2% of GDP, okay, on defense. In 2021, only 4 NATO countries were doing that. Today, because of Ukraine, it's like 23 of the 32. But even then, big players like Germany, France, Turkey, Spain, Italy, not doing it. Britain barely does it. So we're the glue that holds the whole project together. Whatever that project is, for better or worse, we're the glue. We've spent more money in Ukraine than the EU combined, and the aid that they did send wasn't even in working condition. After the Second World War, we defended Europe. We sent them $13 billion, billions more cents. After the collapse of the USSR, we could have pulled back. We did the opposite. We have more equipment and soldiers in Europe right now, today, as Americans, than we did even in the 1980s. Meanwhile, the European nations cut their defense spending to focus on spending more, on social welfare programs than they, America's selfish. All right, so we're kicking you out of the basement. Go get a job. You've been, for the last 60 years, time to move out, time to get a job, time to stop being a NEET, all right? We're not going to enable your behavior anymore because it's making you behave very recklessly. You're ruining everything. You're being annoying. You're antagonizing Russia. And Trump, of course, already did this song and dance with them in 2017, and they made commitments, and then they lied, and it seems like he's not going to do this again. So Vance's speech breaking apart the European military and the media and the government complex, treatment of their own citizens, political systems, calling them idiots, it's obviously a part of the larger strategy, and he did a fantastic job. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. Zelenskyy's reaction to the speech basically confirms as much. There was an interview with Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, and he said something like, the U.S. Vice President made it clear, decades of the relationship between America and Europe are ending. From now on, things are going to be different, and Europe is just going to have to adjust. And we're just going to have to focus on ourselves and improve ourselves, and we deserve better, whatever. Okay, so true, Zelenskyy. Things are different now. This is your first non-miss on record. You've also got a statement from the new leader of Germany who was just elected, and he said following the results of the election, something like, it's clear that the Americans, or these Americans in this administration, mostly don't care about the fate of Europe one way or the other. Like, yes, but not in the way that you mean. It's a priority to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible, but not for you. But we have to achieve independence from them. That's what we got to do. In the past, it was understood that it's valuable for us to protect Europe against communism, against the Soviets, whatever, funding coups in Italy, pro-Western forces in Greece. But we cannot continue to enable this behavior with our money and with our military. Europe playing games with, our security trade and our defense, like that's got to be done. It's got to be done. It's over. Bye. You're dead. And we saw this with Marco Rubio. He basically said that in an interview with this woman, and we'll spend less time on this, but time on this we will spend. Take a look.
There's a lot of work to be done to realign everything we do at the State Department with the national interest. That's what our foreign policy needs to be about. And that's been lost over the years. The idea that we have to define what our national interest is and then ensure that everything we do, every dollar we spend, every program we operate, every word we say is in furtherance of the national interest.
Is that, if I could jump in, is that what an America First State Department looks like?
Yeah, an America First State Department is not an America-only State Department. It's a State Department that defines what is the important national interest the United States has in different parts of the world, and then everything we do is aligned with that principle. And that's been lost, I think, by and large in American foreign policy for a long time. I think you can track it back without going into history lessons in the post-Cold War era, where the U.S. was the sole superpower, and we were called into doing all sorts of things that no other country in the world could do. And some of it was not aligned with our foreign or our national interest because we hadn't even defined what the national interest is. It also means there are things in the world that are important and that matter and are good causes, but they can't be a priority because the priority first and foremost has to be on the national interest of the United States. So I think this is by and large an organization of people that seek direction, and if you give them clear direction about what we're trying to pursue and accomplish, they'll go out and they'll do it. And that's how we're trying to align, even as we have to do our job on a daily basis, is what our hope is to align and give the State Department clear missions from the field, meaning our embassies and people out across the world, all the way to the 7th floor where I work.
Little Marco, all grown up. Big Mark puts a frog in your throat, doesn't it? Like everyone else, Big Mark has submitted to Trump's foreign policy outlook, his realist outlook. We're actually looking out for our interests again, and the national interest is perhaps counterintuitively not shilling out billions of dollars in handouts, defense spending, trade deficits, whatever, all for Europe. It doesn't work. We need to take the whole thing back to formula. Europe has seen the biggest war on the continent since the 1940s, and for 3 years, the nations of the European Union have failed to find peace. They're still using Russian oil, and I'm not even opposed to that, but the point is, like, they're failing to deal with the boogeyman on their own. Marco Rubio is simply echoing what Trump has been saying since 2016, probably even before that. We are going to realign every dollar and program to be putting America first, putting the American people first. And this is really why I thought it'd be important to highlight this here, because these comments are not just existing in a vacuum. It is only because of Donald Trump. I mean, he has single-handedly shifted, as we've said forever, American foreign policy to be to where now even you've got mainstream Republican senators like Rubio, Democrat senators now, all of these people who otherwise would not have are now reassessing American foreign policy towards Europe. So much that even European leaders, regardless of election outcomes, are preparing to decouple from America. I mean, we've said this forever, regardless of popularity, it only happens because of Donald Trump, and people are finally coming to terms with that. He also addressed the foreign policy of the Cold War era by name, again, in relation to Canada, their uneven trade with us. You know, he hits it right out of the park. Again, I know the Hispanics are good at baseball, the Cubans in particular, but Rubio, you're doing a great job, big guy.
But it goes back to the point I made. For decades, the United States allowed uneven trade imbalances to develop. During the Cold War, you know why we did it? We did it because we felt like we want countries to be strong economically, even if it means they're cheating, because we don't want them to fall victim to some internal Marxist coup that overturns their government or what have you. Those days are gone. These are rich, developed economies. And ultimately, who can argue against the fact that whatever they charge us, we should charge them. Whatever they prohibit, if they don't allow American companies to do it, we should not allow their companies to do it here.
That we have a Secretary of State who is fluently speaking in the language of the authentic American right, using terms like Cold War consensus in a negative way, that is a huge development. We have to think in terms of decades here. And if you want to just use Big Mark as one barometer, him in 2015 versus him in 2025, this is what success looks like. We should chase that feeling. So you've got Vance, you've got Rubio, but of course Trump is the main player here, right? None of this happens without Trump. Vance had some anti-Trump stuff. Rubio had some anti-Trump stuff. Now they've become powerful players in Trump's corner because he's a winner and what he does simply works. This is not subversion. This is not deviation. This is integration. This is conquest. This is how politics works. Go back and read about the men at the Constitutional Convention, how they viewed each other. We're talking about men here. You know, heads are going to butt. It's actually weirder if they don't. But once reality makes itself known, you're supposed to align yourself with it. You're not supposed to hold grudges and be bitter. You're supposed to just do what wins and move the ball down the field. Some people still don't get this. They probably never will. I think it's their destiny not to. Like, imagine Mike Pence. Imagine Mike Pence doing this. You know, he was more of like a give a speech to the Boy Scouts of Ohio sort of vice president, which is why he's a dead name, washed up. Rex Tillerson, remember him? Bye-bye. What do they do now? They snipe at Trump on Twitter, and then they just get like ratioed by all the Anon accounts who are currently serving in the Trump administration. Like literal LOL, dude. All this political striving for years. And for what? To be relegated like the garbage that they are. Big fat mistake. But okay, I want to play the keynote now. This really enshrines the vibe shift, right, of the second Trump administration towards Europe, broadly speaking, maybe the future even of American foreign policy in general. Take a look.
About the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You
God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what
I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war,
you're not in a good position. You don't have the
the
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you don't.
You're
playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm
with the
president
lives
in
of
the war.
millions of people.
You're
gambling with World War III.
What are you
You're
thinking
gambling
about?
with
What are you
World
thinking
War
about?
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's
with
back
all
to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
Even
entire
today.
meeting, have you said thank you?
Even today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
For the past 3 years, European and American lawmakers have been groveling for Zelensky, writing blank checks, sending massive stockpiles of resources without serious audit or accounting. They've been saying that Putin is just Hitler 2.0. The Biden administration hadn't spoken to Russia since the invasion in 2022. You had 3 years of no contact with a world superpower. Right. You know, even at the height of the Cold War, like the most tenuous moments of the Cold War, we would have a line from our president to the leader in the Kremlin. Like, this is just basic diplomacy, intelligence, whatever. It's not hard. But the theater kids, these theater kids, they do not think in these terms. They're just scorned women. They're like, well, we're just going to give them the silent treatment. That'll show Putin. Meanwhile, they're cozying up with China, trying to undermine the dollar with these economic allyship. It's just been 3 years of TCOG, okay? TCOG, by the way, endorsed by Brett Cooper, endorsed by Jack Posobiec. We're getting so many endorsements, you wouldn't even believe it. And this is what just happened in this video. You had a literal theater kid get confronted by people with actual conviction, a couple self-made real American patriots, and they're not just going to let Zelensky walk over them because that's just what you do, because International Democratic Human Rights Coalition, whatever. And that's been the story of America's relationship with Europe. They diplomatically spite us, and we continue to defend them. So Zelensky essentially like blows up in the Oval Office, throws a little temper tantrum, gets kicked out just for the White House staffers to actually eat the meal that was prepared for him. And nobody not paying close attention could have seen this coming. They will be surprised by it, but the signs were there for people not just watching the mainstream talking heads, because shortly after Trump became president, he called Putin on February 12th, right after he called Zelensky. It's called The Art of the Deal. We need a president that wrote The Art of the Deal. A week later, you have Russian and American diplomats meeting in Saudi Arabia to discuss ending the war. Noticeably absent, Ukraine. Also noticeably absent, the entire continent of Europe. No one was there. Not France, Britain, Germany. Why? Because it doesn't matter. No one cares. Their contribution to the discussion is not required at this time. No one cares. And it's funny because they understand this on some level. They have to understand this, right? They have to know how screwed they are. They have to understand how little leverage they have. Because while this was going on, French President Macron called together some emergency summit with European leaders. America not invited to discuss Trump's freaking erratic behavior, like trying to, end the war in Ukraine. And according to the reports, they met and, quote, promptly agreed upon nothing, which is about what we can expect, I guess, from European leaders. Keep in mind, while this is going on, you got Vance's speech in Munich, Rubio's tour in Latin America, Saudi Arabia discussing the Palestinian question. So following Trump's phone call with Putin, Zelensky said that Trump was, quote, living in a disinformation space governed by Moscow. Okay, well, you're about to be too if you don't make a deal. You have to make a deal. You don't have the cards. He shot right back. Trump said Zelensky's a dictator who canceled elections, who couldn't even win re-election, much unlike Donald Trump, who famously never loses elections or impedes elections or questions elections, and also famously has no dictatorial ambitions. Trump also blamed Ukraine for the war with Russia, which if you've been watching this channel for a while, we said all the way back in 2022 at the outbreak of the war, back when the median take, even from people who are typically pretty smart, was that we have to support Ukraine. That's okay. I like being ahead of the bell curve. So eventually Trump basically strong arms Zelensky into handing over his natural resources to America. That's why he was at the White House to finalize and sign that deal. That obviously did not take place despite Zelensky allegedly begging to stay. It's like when your girlfriend gets out of the car, I'm going to walk home, and you just let her. You just drive away. It's kind of like that. And Europe's response to Zelensky getting kicked out of the White House was, of course, to hold another emergency summit. They posted walls of text on Twitter, very serious behavior, posting statements like, Ukraine is not alone. That's about all Europe has to offer Ukraine. Just vibes, thoughts, well-wishing sentiment. Their militaries are in ruin. Their countries are in mass political and civil disorder, which we've covered. So yeah, Trump is breaking off with Europe because they're not behaving well and they're being mean to their people, and we don't want to finance that. They're costing us more than they're worth, and Trump recognizes this. I mean, he didn't become a billionaire by making bad deals, holding on to bad assets. He simply declared bankruptcy a handful of times and moved on, right? It's time to break away. Europe, the EU, NATO, they got to figure out, go make it on your own. Go, be free. And it might sound bad. I know I've got a lot of European listeners. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. I don't even think that you disagree with this, European listeners. You can't survive as a vassal state of America, and America can't survive it either. America is the host organism to a parasite that is the international libtard. It's sucking American patriots dry. It's hurting you. And I love Europe. You got to make it. You have to. It must happen. But you got to look out for yourself, by yourself. I'm not worried about Europe. They've been outnumbered and conquered throughout history. It's never been a problem before. But on our side of the pond, from Vance to Rubio to Trump, it's clear that America is back to looking out for Americans, for American patriots, and this is good news. For the globalists who want you and I to die in foreign countries, this is a shattering of their control. This is Trump's America. We're done subsidizing the rest of the world. Europe, immigrants, USAID, patronage networks, all of it. We're ending the never-ending liberal wars. We're taking back the world with love and peace. And Europeans, of course, can choose the same path. They're more than capable, and I think that some have and will continue to do so in the future. So yeah, people actually thought that Trump wouldn't end the wars. Here we are. We're ending wars that you'd forgotten about. We're ending wars that you've never even heard of before. Maybe he succeeds, maybe he fails, but he's done more than literally anybody else could or would be willing to. And if he can't end the war in Ukraine, then nobody can, right? But if the war continues without American support, hey, I care about American lives, American resources, all that, staying within American households. And insofar as Trump is cutting us off from potential quagmires in Europe by dismantling the transatlantic alliance, I'm thankful. We think in terms of decades here. We delay gratification. We control the impulse. We look to the horizon, 2015 to 2025. Not bad for patriots. Not bad for the international patriots. Let's keep that going. Hey guys, if you like this video, leave it a thumbs up, leave it a comment, to subscribe to the channel, and then of course hit the notification bell. Share the video with a friend. Share the video with everybody in the entire European continent. Everyone's always, 25% of my audience is in Europe. And everyone's always like, when are you going to talk about Europe? I just did. We think in terms of decades. Approximately once a decade, we can have a Europe video. Then we'll go back to America. I'll get Cloyd Rivers to come on the writing staff. You know who Cloyd Rivers is? Then a little bit before your time. But yeah, we love Europe. We love Europe. We love America. We have many similar problems, obviously, and we are facilitating poor behavior. We're enabling poor behavior from your leadership, and so we have to say bye-bye to that. So thank you so much for watching. May God bless America. May God bless Europe. May God bless Australia. Why not? May God bless. I shouldn't say that, actually. God bless us, everyone. How about that? All right. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.